chilling story of the woman who discovered her husband never slept, Salem, 1903. Before we dive into this story, I'd like to know where you're watching from today. New York, Los Angeles, London, Chicago, Toronto, San Francisco. Drop it in the comments below. I always love reading your messages. Now let's begin. October 17, 1903, Derby Street, Salem, Massachusetts. The autumn wind carried salt spray from Salem Harbor, rattling the lace curtains of Elena's narrow Victorian row house on Derby Street. Fog pressed against the window panes like curious fingers, while gas lamps flickered yellow through the mist outside, casting wavering shadows across the horsehair wallpaper. It was 11:47 p.m. when Elena Grayson, 28 years old, wife of the shipwright Thomas Grayson, finally pretended to drift off in their heavy oak four-poster bed. The whale oil lamp on the bedside table cast long trembling shadows, and the mantel clock ticked relentlessly, each second amplified in the oppressive silence. Outside, the temperature hovered at 42 degrees, the kind of damp coastal chill that seeped through cracks and settled in your bones. Thomas, 34 years old, broad-shouldered with calloused hands permanently stained from shipyard tar, sat in his usual armchair by the window. Same position every night for the past 6 months. Spine rigid as a board, hands folded precisely on his knees, eyes fixed unblinking on the foggy street below. No book in his lap, no pipe smoldering, no newspaper crumpled beside him, just watching. Elena had dismissed it at first as worry over the shipyard layoffs. Rumors swirled that the new steamship contracts favored Boston over Salem, but tonight something felt different. Her heart beat at 92 beats per minute as she lay there, eyes slitted just enough to watch him through her lashes. Elena's diary, entry 1, written the next morning by candlelight. He never blinks. 6 hours in that chair tonight, eyes open like a corpse propped in a coffin. When I faked waking at midnight, he smiled and said, "Good morning, dear," but it was still pitch dark outside. His voice had that same warmth, same cadence, but his pupils didn't dilate in the lamplight. Tonight, I marked the floor with chalk under the bed. If he lies down while I sleep, I'll know. God, what if he doesn't? The clock hands crept toward 2:57 a.m. Elena's breath caught as Thomas rose silently. No creak of chair, no yawn, no stretch. His boots clicked softly on the pine floorboards as he walked to the door, pausing only to adjust his suspenders. He slipped out without coat or hat despite the biting wind. Elena waited 10 agonizing minutes, then crept to the window. Through the fogged glass, she saw his silhouette moving down Derby Street toward the harbor, steady and unhurried, swallowed by the mist after 47 paces. At dawn, 7:12 a.m. sharp, Thomas returned. His wool trousers were damp to the knee, as if he'd walked through heavy dew or shallow-tide pools, though no rain had fallen. He smelled faintly of turned earth and brine, odd for a man supposedly at the dry shipyard. Rough night at the yard, love? Elena asked casually, stirring oatmeal over the cast-iron stove, her hands trembling slightly on the wooden spoon. His smile was perfect, crinkling the corners of his hazel eyes just so. Just thinking, Ellie. Always thinking about providing for us. He kissed her forehead, his lips cool as autumn marble, then sat to eat. A full bowl, every bite chewed methodically. The family tabby Whiskers, a fat gray tomcat who'd shared their bed for 7 years, hissed violently from the kitchen doorway and bolted upstairs, refusing to enter the parlor for the rest of the day. Elena found scratch marks on the banister, deep and fresh, as if the cat had launched itself in blind panic. October 20th, 1903, 3 nights later, the pattern repeated with suffocating precision. Each evening after supper, salt cod, potatoes, and weak tea, Thomas would settle into the armchair at precisely 10 p.m. Elena tested him subtly, dropping a book at 11:30 p.m. to gauge reaction. His head turned slowly, eyes tracking the fall without surprise, then returned to the window. "Clumsy hands tonight, dear. No irritation, no concern. Just observation." On the fourth night, Elelina prepared meticulously while Thomas read the Salem Observer at the kitchen table, though she noticed he never turned past page 3. She ground white chalk into invisible powder and dusted it along every floorboard crack beneath the bed, across the threshold, and in a faint semicircle around his armchair. "Early night for me," she yawned theatrically, climbing under the goose-down quilt. Thomas nodded, extinguishing the whale oil lamp at 10:15 p.m. She lay rigid, counting her breaths to simulate sleep. Inhale 4 seconds, exhale 6. The clock ticked. Midnight passed, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. At 3:17 a.m. exactly, the third chime barely faded. Thomas stood. Elelina tracked his footsteps through slitted eyes past the bed. No rustle of quilts across the chalk marked threshold, no disturbance to the front door, click of the latch. Gone. Morning inspection, October 21st. Sunlight filtered weakly through salt crusted windows as Elelina dropped to her knees, skirt pooling around her, heart sinking. She examined the floorboards, pristine, not a single chalk line disturbed, no indentation in the ticking mattress, no displaced pillow. Thomas had sat vigil for 5 hours and 28 minutes, then left without ever lying down. Desperate for normalcy, Elelina visited widow Margaret Hale next door, a childless seamstress of 52, whose parlor smelled of lavender sachets and liniment for her rheumatism. Over chamomile tea steaming in china cups, Elelina confessed, Thomas sits up all night, eyes open like he's waiting for something. Margaret patted her hand, knuckles knobby with age. Shipwrights carry the sea's restlessness, dear. My Samuel did the same after the Gloucester schooner went down. Sat by that window till dawn, listening for ghosts in the fog. It'll pass. But her eyes darted to Elelina's window where Thomas's silhouette now stood, watching them both. The cat's warning, that afternoon, Whiskers refused supper, raw mackerel left untouched, and shadowed Elelina upstairs, claws clicking anxiously. When Thomas returned from the shipyard at 6:18 p.m., the cat arched its back, fur bristling, and fled to the attic. Elelina found a single whisker on Thomas's sleeve, later snapped clean at the root. Evening of discovery, October 24th. Fog thickened to pea-soup density, muffling the clop of delivery wagons and newsboys hawking headlines about Teddy Roosevelt's Panama speech. Elelina resolved to follow at 3:17 a.m. As Thomas slipped out, she threw on her wool cloak, lit a bullseye lantern, and trailed him into the mist. 7 miles down Derby Street, past the Custom House to Charter Street Cemetery, Thomas stopped at a blank slate headstone, weathered gray, marked only T.G. 1893, body not recovered. He knelt, palms flat on frozen earth, and whispered guttural syllables, Latin twisted with something ancient, guttural. Non dormio, custos. The fog swirled unnaturally around him, lantern light refracting into oily rainbows. Elelina froze behind a hawthorn tree, thorns snagging her cloak. Thomas's head snapped up, unerringly directly toward her hiding spot, though the fog should have concealed her completely. Cliffhanger. He rose slowly, smiling that perfect husbandly smile, and beckoned. Come home, Ellie. Some things are safer unwatched. But as he turned away, Elelina glimpsed his shadow on the headstone. Tall, yes, but elongated, with no head. October 25th, 1903, Grayson Home, Derby Street, Salem. Pea-soup fog blanketed Derby Street so thick Elelina could barely see the gas lamps' yellow halos 20 feet away. The air smelled of cold smoke and rotting fish from the harbor, while Atlantic gales rattled loose slate shingles on the Victorian row houses. Inside, the Grayson home felt smaller, more claustrophobic, every creak amplified, every shadow deeper. Elelina's hands shook as she ground more chalk into powder, this time tracing precise lines across every floorboard from bedside to parlor threshold, armchair semicircle to front door. Heart pounding at 108 BPM, she worked by candlelight, whispering prayers she'd half forgotten from childhood. Thomas returned from the shipyard at 6:18 p.m., sharp, hanging his wool capote by the door. Supper smells heavenly, Ellie. he said, voice warm as always, though his hazel eyes never quite met hers anymore. Over boiled cod and potatoes, he recounted shipyard gossip. The new steam dredge sinking pilings for Boston's ship canal, foreman threatening layoffs, normal conversation, perfect husband. But Whiskers the tabby watched from the stair landing with dilated pupils, tail lashing. That night, Elelena feigned exhaustion earlier than usual. Headache from the damp, she murmured at 9:47 p.m., climbing under the goose-down quilt. Thomas nodded sympathetically, extinguishing the whale oil lamp at 10:15 p.m. Precisely, the mantel clock ticked like a heartbeat in the darkness. The vigilante lay rigid, counting breaths to simulate sleep. Inhale 4 seconds, exhale 6. Midnight passed 1:00 a.m. 2:00 a.m. Her muscles screamed from tension, but she dared not shift. At 3:17 a.m. exactly, the third chime faded. Thomas rose, no chair creak, no yawn. Through slitted eyes, Elelena tracked his silhouette past the bed. Quilt undisturbed across the chalk threshold lines, pristine boots clicking softly to the door. Latch clicked, gone. She waited 10 agonizing minutes, then dropped to her knees, skirt pooling around her, bull's eye lantern in hand. She inspected the floorboards inch by inch, pristine. Not one chalk line disturbed. No mattress depression. No pillow displacement. Thomas had sat motionless for 5 hours and 13 minutes, then glided out without ever touching the floor, like a living man. Elelena's diary, entry 4, scrawled at dawn. He glides, doesn't step, he flows, floorboards unmarked. Returned 3:30 a.m., trousers damp to knees though no rain, boots trailing harbor mud, mirrors fog when he passes, even unheated ones. Whiskers sleeps pressed against me now, claws through nightgown. Shipyard foreman visited today. Thomas hasn't worked overtime in months, yet hands stay calloused. Fresh blisters daily, who labors while we sleep, the widow's counsel. Desperate for sanity, Elelena visited widow Margaret Hale next door at noon. Margaret's parlor smelled of lavender sachets and liniment oil for her rheumatism, knobbed knuckles. Over chamomile tea steaming in flowered china, Elelena confessed everything: the vigil, chalk marks, the cat's terror. Margaret listened, gray eyes sharp beneath her lace cap. Shipwrights carry sea restlessness, dear, she said finally, patting Elena's hand. My Samuel sat that armchair after the Gloucester schooner sank, eyes open till dawn, listening for ghosts in fog. Passed after 3 years, grief works strange. But as Elena left, she caught Margaret staring out the window at Thomas's silhouette in their parlor. Stock still, watching them both. The mirror test. That afternoon, Elena tested mirrors systematically. Hallway looking glass, fogged instantly as Thomas passed for lunch, no breath visible. Bedroom cheval mirror, same cloudy handprint shape, evaporating slowly. Kitchen's tiny hand mirror, Thomas avoided it entirely, turning his head precisely 17 degrees when she held it up. Vanity is a sin, Ellie. He smiled, but his reflection showed eyes too still, pupils fixed mid-dilation. Whiskers attacked Thomas's ankles at supper, drawing blood that didn't flow, dark syrup congealing instantly on pine floorboards. The cat fled to the attic, leaving 3 deep claw marks on Thomas's boot leather. The harbor walk. Fog thickened to opacity by 10:00 p.m., muffling delivery wagons clip, clop, and newsboys' cries about Teddy Roosevelt's Panama speech. Elena resolved to follow at 3:17 a.m. As Thomas slipped out, she donned wool cloak, lit bull's eye lantern dim to a slit, and trailed him into the mist. 7 miles down Derby Street, past the custom house's glowing windows, to Charter Street's cemetery's iron gates. Thomas walked with mechanical precision, never hesitating at intersections. In the cemetery, a jumble of weathered slate headstones, Gallows Hill, which markers from 1692. He knelt before blank slate. TG 1893, body not recovered, palms flat on frozen earth. He whispered guttural syllables, non dormio, custos, a Latin twisted with something ancient. Fog swirled unnaturally around him, lantern light refracting oily rainbows. Elelena froze behind a hawthorn tree, thorns snagging her cloak. Thomas's head snapped up, unerringly straight toward her fog gun. Sealed spot. Confrontation in the graveyard. Come home. Softly, perfect husbandly smile in moonlight. Something safer unwatched. She stumbled back, lantern swinging wildly. Thomas rose unhurriedly, beckoning. As he turned toward the cemetery path, lantern light caught his shadow on the blank headstone. Tall, elongated but headless, neck dissolving into coiling fog tendrils. Elelena fled blindly, cutting her left foot on a jagged grave marker. Bloody footprints trailed back to Derby Street, cliffhanger. Dawn found her collapsed on the parlor floor, chalk lines still pristine. Thomas knelt beside her, stroking her hair. Bad dreams again, love. Let me watch over you tonight. But under his thumbnail, visible only in morning light, a single grain of grave dirt. October 27th, 1903. Salem Athenaeum, Essex Street. Indian summer warmth broke the coastal chill, golden maple leaves swirling across Essex Street as Elelena clutched her wool shawl against the autumn breeze. The Athenaeum's oak, paneled reading room smelled of leather bindings, candle wax, and dust motes dancing in gaslight. Archivist Mr. Hawthorne, 65, bespectacled with ink-stained fingers, pored over shipyard ledgers at her request. Outside, church bells tolled 2:00 p.m. From the first church, their echo carrying Thomas's words, non dormio, custos, Grayson shipwright accident. Hawthorne murmured, sliding forward a brittle news clipping. Salem Observer, December 14th, 1893. Thomas Grayson, age 24, crushed in dry dock collapse at Grayson and Sons shipyard. Body pulverized beyond recovery, swept into harbor by outgoing tide. Sole witness, Brother Philip Grayson. Elelena's knuckles whitened on the table. Her Thomas was 34 now, exactly 10 years older than the corpse. Marriage record, she whispered. Hawthorne retrieved another ledger. Elelena Grayson wed Thomas Grayson, age 24, June 17th, 1008. 194, 9 months after the accident. He remarried. Hawthorne frowned. No death certificate filed. Unusual, but harbor accidents often lacked formalities. Elelena's vision blurred. She'd buried wedding corals in their garden that June day. Thomas's calloused hands had lifted her veil. Elelena's diary, entry 7, my husband died at 24. I married a corpse at 24. 10 years later, he hasn't aged a day beyond 34. Chalk lines untouched, grave dirt under nails, headless shadow. Charter Street stone reads TG 1893. Body not recovered. Recovered where? The mirror tests. That afternoon, Elelena tested systematically. Hallway looking glass, fogged instantly as Thomas passed for lunch. No breath condensation visible. Bedroom cheval mirror, identical cloudy handprint, evaporating over 47 seconds. Kitchen hand mirror. Thomas turned his head precisely 17 degrees away, smiling. Vanity's a sin, Ellie. His reflection showed pupils fixed mid. Dilation, no response to light changes. Whiskers attacked Thomas's ankles at supper, drawing blood that congealed instantly. Dark syrup on pine floorboards. No scent of copper. The cat fled to the attic, leaving 3 parallel claw marks scoring Thomas's boot leather to bare hide. Confrontation, 8:47 p.m. Elelena waited until dishes cleared, parlor fire crackling low. Thomas, where do you go at 3:17? His smile never wavered, hazel eyes steady. Shipyard worries keep me vigilant, love. Salem needs watchmen. She pressed. Charter Street Cemetery isn't a shipyard. Thomas froze. First unnatural pause in 10 years of marriage. Dreams, Ellie. Harbor mist plays tricks. At 3:17 a.m., the mantel clock chimed. Thomas rose, but Elelena blocked the parlor door, lantern raised. Show me your shadow. Gaslight flickered on horsehair wallpaper, elongated silhouette, neck dissolving into coiling tendrils. No head, Thomas sighed. Some truths break marriages, Elelena. He glided past through her shoulder, cold as harbor fog. Sister Clara arrives. Dawn brought a Boston train whistle. Clara Whitmore, Elena's elder sister, 32, arrived disheveled. Widow's weeds pristine despite the sick. Sour rail journey. Your letters frightened me, Clara said, hugging fiercely. Over hasty tea, Elena confessed everything. Clara soothed. Mother's death unhinged you. Grief conjures ghosts. But when Thomas descended the stairs, Clara paled. Ellie, his eyes, bedroom mirror test. Thomas's reflection showed pitch black sclea. No whites visible. Clara dropped her teacup, Wedgwood shattering. That's not reflection, that's absence. Shipyard verification. Noon found sisters at Grayson and Sons shipyard. Foreman McTavish, tobacco-chewing Scott. Thomas tops workman but hasn't taken overtime since '94. Clockwork leaves 6:00 p.m. sharp. Elena pressed, December 1893 accident. McTavish spat, crushed like an eggshell. Brother Philip identified remains, never saw Philip again after that. The 3:17 summons. Fog returned heavier, 95% humidity choking Derby Street. At 3:17 a.m., Thomas didn't leave. Instead, he led the sisters to the cellar. A salt circle, concealed stone trapdoor carved with 17th century sigils matching witch trial confessions. Help me watch, Thomas said, eyes now half black, or join the unslept. The trapdoor rattled, something below scraped stone. Clara gripped Elena's hand. We face it together. But Thomas's smile widened too wide for a human jaw. Thresholds need guardians, eternal. Cliffhanger, trapdoor splintered. Seawater geysered upward, carrying a skeletal hand clutching Thomas's ankle. Wrist chained to bedrock below, November 3, 1903. Charter Street Cemetery, Salem Harbor, fog. A nor'easter battered Salem's coastline, 38 mph winds hurling salt rain sideways through Charter Street Cemetery's rusted iron gates. Lightning cracked over Gallows Hill, illuminating weathered headstones. Bridget Bishop, executed 1692. Giles Corey, pressed to death. Elena and Clara huddled behind gnarled hawthorn trees, wool cloaks sodden, bull's eye lanterns dimmed to slits. The air smelled of brine, wet earth, and ozone. 42 degrees, 98% humidity, turning breath to vapor. At precisely 3:17 a.m., Thomas emerged from pea soup fog, walking mechanical 2.3 mph from Derby Street. No coat despite the gale, no hesitation at intersections. He knelt before the blank slate headstone T.G. 1893, body not recovered, palms flat on frozen earth, and recited Non Dormio, Custos Vigil. Clara gasped, clutching Elena's arm. Enochian, the angel's language from 1692, which confessions. John Hale's transcripts. Thomas's voice deepened mid-chant, gravel undertones emerging. 17 watchers bind the threshold. Salt water drowns the sleepers below. Fog swirled unnaturally around him, lantern light refracting oily rainbows. Skeletal tree roots seemed to writhe beneath frost, cracked earth. Discovery at the Peabody Essex Museum. Dawn found the sisters shivering in the Peabody Essex Museum's maritime archives, smelling of salt, preserved rope, and India ink. Curator Miss Abigail Putnam, 41, descendant of a witch trial judge, uncovered the Salem dry dock catastrophe of 1893. Thomas Grayson crushed by a 14-ton oak keel, body liquefied instantly, swept harborward by the tide. Brother Philip Grayson witnessed vanished the same night. No funeral, no gravestone beyond the blank slate. But you married him in 1894, Abigail noted. Elena whispered 9 months after death. Abigail paled, sliding forward a facsimile of a 1692 occult text, mentioning sleepless watchers guarding drowned thresholds. Which law, Elena breathed, Salem's blood debt from the 1692 executions. 17 souls didn't die, they transformed into guardians, return home. Confrontation, the nor'easter intensified, windows rattling like loose teeth. Thomas sat calmly by the parlor hearth, steam rising from damp trousers. Church social tonight, he smiled. Elena blocked the doorway. Enochian isn't shipyard talk, Thomas. His hazel eyes flickered black momentarily. Harbor superstitions, love, a mirror test. Every looking glass shattered simultaneously, hand mirror, shovel, hallway pier. Shards rained harmlessly around Thomas, who brushed glass dust from his coat unconcerned. Some truths break houses, he murmured. Clara's breaking point. Clara confessed over hasty tea. James drowned in 1898. Gloucester schooner. I smell brine on my pillow some nights. The sisters embraced, realizing shared widowhood. We married ghosts, Clara wept. United they planned a cellar investigation, the cellar trapdoor. Midnight. Lightning illuminated the salt circle in the Grayson cellar, 17th century sigils matching the Peabody sketches. Thomas appeared behind them silently. Help me watch the threshold, or join the unslept. The trapdoor rattled violently. Seawater bubbled through cracks despite the 200-foot distance from the harbor. Thomas pried open the stone slab. Saltwater stairs descended into darkness, 34 degrees, thick with fish rot. 1,692 witches became watchers, he explained, eyes half black. Salem's 19 executed souls guard drowned realms below. I volunteered in 1893, spared the shipyard from collapse. A skeletal hand breached the surface, chained wrist dripping harbor muck, clutching Thomas's ankle. Elilina's dilemma. 10 years without sleep, Clara gasped. Thomas nodded, eternal vigilance. Philip refused, drowned instead. Elilina faced an impossible choice. Abandon her husband to solitary torment or join the guardianship. Love endures beyond flesh, Thomas whispered, black eyes imploring. Emotional anchor. Clara gripped Elilina's shoulders. Anchors drag ships down, sister, cut loose. But Elilina's hand lingered on Thomas's calloused palm, identical to their wedding day in 1894. Lightning flashed, the cellar stairs flooded higher, skeletal hands multiplying. Cliffhanger. Thomas pushed Elilina toward the stairs. Choose now, watch with me eternally, or wake Salem to what rises at 3:17. Water lapped at boot tops. Something massive shifted below, scraping bedrock. November 4th, 1903. Grayson cellar, 3:17 a.m. Hurricane. Force winds shook the Victorian rowhouse to its foundations, slate shingles ripping free and clattering down Derby Street like scattered teeth. The cellar air thickened to 34 degrees, dense with saltwater mist despite being 200 feet from Salem Harbor. Lightning strobed through basement windows, illuminating 17 stone slabs lining the flooded chamber, each carved with a name and date. Philip Endicott, 1731. Abigail Porter, 1789. Samuel Hale, 1847. Thomas Grayson, 1893. Skeletal hands clutched rusted ankle chains above the waterline bones barnacled and green with sea growth. Elilina stumbled back from the stairs, boots splashing in rising brine that tasted of death and centuries. Thomas descended behind her, eyes now fully black, no whites, no iris, just obsidian voids reflecting lantern flames. Clara gripped Elilina's arm, her widow's strength steadying them both. What are they? Clara whispered, voice cracking. Thomas knelt beside the nearest slab, Samuel Hale, 1847, and touched the skeletal hand with reverence. Watchers, he said, voice layered with oceanic depth. Salem's blood debt from 1692. 19 souls executed on Gallows Hill didn't die, they transformed, bound to guard the drowned threshold where the hanged witches' rage pooled. Bridget Bishop, Giles, Corey, Martha Carrier. Their fury opened a door to what waits beneath harbor waters. We seal it, forever vigilant, never sleeping. The full horror revealed. Elilina's lantern shook, casting wild shadows. The dry dock collapse wasn't an accident. Thomas shook his head. Ritual sacrifice. Every 60 years, Salem needs a new watcher. Philip witnessed my death, then fled rather than take my place. The threshold demanded a guardian. I volunteered. To save the shipyard. Save Salem. 17 watchers maintained the salt circle prison above drowned witch rage. A deep voice boomed from the flooded stairs, bubbling up with seawater. Release us, sleepless one, or bring replacements. The pact demands eternal watching. The water churned, revealing glimpses of something massive below. Arms, tentacles, pure fury given form. Clara crossed herself, lips moving in silent prayer. Elalina's breaking point, 10 years. Elalina shouted over the gale. 10 years pretending, our wedding night you sat in that chair, our anniversary watching fog. Every morning I woke to a husband who never dreamed. Tears streamed hot down her frozen cheeks. I loved a ghost performing memories of life. Thomas reached for her, hand trembling, first genuine human gesture in months. I loved you before death, Elalina. June 1894, I climbed from this cellar one day, just one, to marry you properly. The watchers allowed it, my only warmth in eternal cold. His black eyes glistened, but you deserved sleep, deserved children, aging together. I gave you borrowed time, Clara's anchor. Clara stepped between them, voice iron, hard despite trembling. James drowned in 1898. I smell brine on my pillow some nights, convince myself he's watching, but Elalina, we can't marry ghosts forever. Anchors drag ships to the ocean floor. Sometimes love means cutting loose. Elalina faced her sister. He protected Salem. 17 souls suffering eternal vigil while we slept. Clara gripped her shoulders. And how many more centuries would you join him, never sleeping, never aging, watching that door until madness takes you both? That's not love, that's imprisonment. The choice. Thomas knelt, fully human now, black eyes fading to hazel, warmth creeping back. Join me, Elalina, be the 18th watcher, together eternal. The skeletal hands on the slabs reached toward her, beckoning. Water lapped higher, 6 inches now. Frigid Atlantic brine. Elalina looked at those calloused hands, the same ones that taught her to gut cod, that steadied her through her mother's funeral, that never touched her after dark because they were too cold. Thomas, she whispered, when did you last dream? He froze. 1893, December 12th, dreamed of ships I'd build. And what have you built since? Nothing, only watched the shattering. Elalina made her choice. She grabbed the salt circle ceramic vessel, ancient, cracked, and hurled it against the stone wall. It exploded in white powder, breaking the seal. The 17 slabs cracked simultaneously. Skeletal hands released their chains. Thomas screamed, not in anger but relief, as black eyes flooded with light. Elalina, no, the threshold. Water erupted upward in a geyser, carrying skeletal forms. Bridget Bishop's skull grinning, Giles Corey's ribs crushed flat, Martha Carrier's finger bones still bound with hemp noose fibers. They swirled around Thomas, touching him gently, gratefully, then dissolved into steam that smelled of autumn 1692, of gallows wood and innocent blood. Free, Thomas gasped, collapsing. His body aged instantly, 24 to 34 to 44, gray streaking his hair, calluses softening. You broke the pact, what rises now? But nothing rose. The water drained, revealing only bedrock, no threshold, no drowned rage. Just an empty cellar, the truth beneath. Clara understood first. There was no monster, just punishment. Salem's guilt made watchers, convinced someone must suffer eternally for 1692 sins. But forgiveness breaks prisons. Thomas wept first tears in 10 years, human, warm, salt, tasting. I'm so tired, Elalina. She held him as he aged further, 54, 64, fragile as October leaves. Sleep now, she whispered. Dream of ships you'll never build. He smiled genuinely, finally, and closed his eyes. At 3:17 a.m., Thomas Grayson died, aged 110, in his wife's arms. Epilogue, spring 1904. Elalina and Clara opened a boarding house for widows on Derby Street, 12 rooms, always full. The cellar stayed sealed, but sometimes at 3:17 a.m., floorboards creaked softly, not menacing, just settling. Elalina kept one possession, Thomas's wedding ring, engraved eternal watch ended. She remarried in 1906. A lighthouse keeper named Edward, who dreamed loudly, thrashing quilts, snoring like foghorns. Some nights Elena woke at 3:17 but found Edward beside her, warm and breathing. Whiskers slept at the foot of their bed, purring. Charter Street Cemetery gained a new headstone, Thomas Grayson, 1869-1903, finally resting. No one questioned the math. On October 17th each year, fog thickens around Salem Harbor. Locals claim to see 17 silhouettes walking toward Gallows Hill. Not watchers anymore, just freed souls going home. And at 3:17 a.m., church bells ring once extra unbidden. Elena lived to 87, surrounded by grandchildren Edward gave her. Her last words, "Tell Thomas I still remember, but I'm glad he forgot to watch." The end.